Welcome to Undetected. This is a podcast about web security. I'm a security researcher myself, and I am on a mission to fix the internet. And what better way to do it than invite my friend over and talk about web security? I have Johan Edholm here with me, and we're going to talk about the current state of internet or web security. And in order to do that, we need to go back and look at the early days, or what was early days at least for us, because we're from the same generation, and see how the internet looked back then. Also, I want to take a peek into the future and see what kind of things lies in store for us. This podcast is brought to you by Detectify. So, welcome, Johan.
Thank you.
How are you?
I'm good. All good.
So, can you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Well, my name is Johan, and I'm one of the founders here at Detectify. And on the day-to-day basis, I work with our technical infrastructure.
Yeah. So we both work at Detectify, and Detectify is a hacker-powered security tool that you can use to enforce web security on your systems and on your websites. So you've been working at Detectify for quite some time, like from the beginning, basically.
Yeah, exactly. It's been 5 years or something. But of course, it started much earlier than that. Before it was a place to work, actually. It was just a hobby or a side project that turned out to something bigger, I guess.
Yeah. And let's go back to that tiny bit later on, but I want to know, like, do you remember the first time you went online or used the internet?
I can't really remember the first time, I think, but I remember the early days. We didn't have, of course, this fast internet connection we have now, and actually we weren't even allowed to use computers really at home. My dad's a farmer, and of course you should work with your hands, and computers are bad, all that kind of thing. So it was very different. Everything was slow and kind of taboo, I guess.
Yeah, I remember when we got our first computer, my parents, they don't work in IT either, but for us it was more like everyone got to use it, and like I think when we got our first computer, we didn't have it online, but we used to play a lot of video games with my sister, basically.
Yeah, we were not really allowed to do that because Dad had his like tax things or something on his computer. So he was like, "Oh no, you're gonna get a virus and everything is gonna be terrible." So we weren't allowed to touch it. I remember early days actually. When he was out working at the farm, I actually snuck to his computer anyway, used it, and I remember having to print out like manuals or those old e-signs or those text files basically to read offline.
Yeah. Yeah, but that's fun. Like even back then, like your father was worried about computer viruses, and like I think like they have been around for a long time, but the like overall web security, it looks super different like back in like those days. I'm talking about like late 90s and early 2000, and like my first experience was that I did websites using GeoCities. Do you remember GeoCities?
Yeah, I never actually used that myself. I think that was before a bit I got into the whole computer things, since I actually couldn't really use much computers. But I do remember that era and all the funky stuff that came with it, I guess.
Yeah, and it was like GeoCities was this like a hosting platform where you could host your website, and there were naturally like different kinds of places where you could host your websites. But I remember my first, like how I encountered hacking first was that my friend's website was basically hacked, and a person who was able to access their website just change the wallpaper on the website. And I was like, oh, is this hacking? Like, wow, like who would ever do this? But what was your first experience when it comes to hacking? Like either you were hacking or...
I don't actually remember that either, to be honest, but I remember IRC was a big part of my early time on the internet and security. I got into security fairly quickly. When it came to IT, I wasn't too much this like casual internet surfer, I guess, because I've always been interested in this like magic kind of thing, and before that was more like literally, the sleight of hand and illusions, and I think hacking has kind of the same feeling. It's someone does something that's out of this world, and I kind of like, I want to understand how the fuck that works.
Yeah.
It annoys me when I don't. So that's when I started to look into it, and that was fairly quick into this whole internet journey, I guess.
Yeah.
But I can't remember a specific, like, oh, this hack was cool or things like that. Not that early. It was, I don't have any such moment. I read a lot of those e-signs or similar texts where people were talking about hacks, and I guess those were probably the earliest experiences of things being hacked without me being actually like seeing it for myself or just reading about it.
Yeah. Did they go into how much detail about hacking, or were they just like, what kind of texts were they?
Honestly, like they were fairly low quality in most of them. Like the few these kind of signs that you see nowadays are fairly impressive usually, but back then it was like teenagers pranking and phone freaking was a big thing.
So phone freaking is that you basically call a like a service and then try to hack like a call service, right?
Kind of. It could be. It's basically like hacking the phone system, because way back you didn't have the internet, but you had phones, and maybe you wanted to call someone and it was really expensive, so people started wanting to bypass that. But then you can do other kind of funky things. If you read like Kevin Mitnick's book, he uses it a lot when he's doing other shenanigans like social engineering. It's really helpful in those cases. And you can wiretap people as well, or things like that.
Yeah, Kevin Mitnick is probably one of the OG hackers out there.
Yeah, he's definitely one of the most famous, at least. Was chased by the FBI and was on their top wanted list for a bunch of years. I can't remember how long. And he's written a lot of books regarding social engineering and security in general.
Yeah. We can leave some recommendations for our listeners. Do you have any recommendation on like Kevin Mitnick's books that you would want to share with us?
Art of Deception, I think, is the most that I've heard about, at least. I read it myself. It was a long time ago now. That was in my early days of security, I'd say. But that one is fairly good when it comes to social engineering.
Yeah.
As far as I can remember. I haven't read much of his other books. He has fairly recently released a biography called Ghost in the Wires, I think. And I found that fairly good. Like you see a lot of things he does and the whole feeling around it and what's actually going on. That was quite interesting.
Yeah. So you basically started working in this field, or like, as you said, as a hobby back in 2008, right?
Yeah, somewhere around there. 2008 was the year me and the other founders turned 18, so we could actually register our first company. But I think we started 2007, just not too serious, I guess. We're just nerds trying to build something because it's fun.
Yeah.
And then it just kind of escalated from there.
Yeah. So what was the initial thing that you were working on?
It was I guess the same scanner as we're having now. We wanted to automate security. Back then, the idea was to maybe be consultant when it comes to security, because that was what everyone was doing. So it seemed like an easy thing. But then we're lazy, so we figured we could just automate. Might as well, right? And then this whole cloud thing was growing, and we were early jumping on that train, I guess. So
yeah, and back during like 2007, 2008, like there were cybersecurity companies or security companies, however you want to put it. But I suppose that the field was quite different back then. Like it wasn't like nowadays we have like bug bounties, we have a lot of consultants, we have pen testers, like a lot of people working in this field, and it's constantly growing. But back then, I suppose it was quite different.
Yeah, exactly. Of course, I'm a bit biased since I was very young then. But how I remember it was people were consultants basically, and of course you had these security products, and but generally things felt kind of slow moving, I'd say, and very enterprisey. It's very much a product for the enterprises or for people with money. It's not like a 10 people company would hire a pen tester. That's very expensive usually.
Yeah.
Sure, you would have antivirus, but not the same love for the web security, I guess.
Yeah.
And also the vulnerabilities you saw were simpler. Say it's getting more and more complex now with bigger systems, and you find flaws in how they interact with each other. Back then, it was often quite straightforward.
Yeah.
And I think that's a symptom of this few people that could afford security, basically.
Yeah.
With consultants. And bug bounties wasn't really a thing that came later. I know Netscape had it like 95. But basically nobody knew about it, or at least I didn't. And that's not web, it was the browser, not the internet itself.
Yeah.
So the whole feeling around it was very different.
Yeah. So what kind of vulnerabilities were there at the time? Like what was the top 3 vulnerabilities?
My feeling is that it was mostly SQL injections. Those were very common, and they have a very large impact. They, of course, they're still around a bit today, but it's much more rare. Back in the days, those were everywhere.
Yeah, so basically being able to dump entries from database directly through a web application.
Yeah, exactly. And then RCEs, or remote code executions, they were, compared to now, very much more common.
Yeah.
It's very basic. Like now you have this SSRF rather, which is the new RCE almost. But yeah.
Yeah, but maybe in cloud environments. So SSRF stands for server-side request forgery, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then what would be the third? I would say like file inclusions, like local or remote even, were fairly big as well if you count the impact. One thing that I would say have stayed is XSSs. They might have changed shape, but it's still around, and probably bigger now even maybe.
Yeah, so JavaScript-based vulnerabilities, being able to insert malicious JavaScript in web applications.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's interesting that you said about the RCEs and the comparing them to SSRFs or to the server-side request forgeries, how they are basically the new RCEs in some cases.
Yeah, that's more or less what we see nowadays. It's when you get that impact, it's usually not the standard RCE before you could really have RCE in a query string, like in the URL.
Yeah.
You don't really see that now. As I mentioned, like things are much more complex. So you kind of use the complexity of an application against itself.
Yeah.
It makes things really hard to detect, I think, as well, or harder at least to detect those kind of things often.
Yeah, that's true. And also going back to the past, but one thing that I feel has changed also over the years is the role of hacktivism.
Yeah, I think so too. I would attribute that partly to bug bounties. Now people have a legal alternative
Yeah.
to make a lot of money even on hacking. But back in the days, it was more people wanted to have fun, or pranksters basically, or teenagers.
Yeah.
Just as you mentioned, like defacing website, or like changing the background and look of a website to spread maybe a message, or just because they're bored.
Yeah. Yeah, it feels like back in the days there was a lot of political, like naturally even to this day, but there was the like hacktivism basically stands for having some kind of political agenda or some kind of like bigger agenda behind hacking. So and for example, there was, well, they still exist to this day, but collectives such as Anonymous and these, but I think they have gotten like smaller.
Yeah, that's my impression as well. Or maybe they're just more careful, or like hidden or something. Maybe they do a lot of things behind the curtains that we don't see, with like dumping things to WikiLeaks, for example, or I can't remember what the Snowden project is called, but where you can basically also send information. So that maybe it's just not as obvious. Back then, people really wanted to make a name for themselves as well.
Yeah.
So you often tagged your releases with your group name, like the Anonymous, even though that's maybe not really a group, I'd say, but you would often do that. And you also had LulzSec, for example, that were fairly big in this. I'm not sure if they had much of a political message, to be honest, but at least they like to tag it. And I think that was fairly common. It's like a two-part thing. I would almost guess that people did that a lot. Like they almost added the political agenda often, just to like rationalize their recklessness, I guess, or their hacking. Like, oh, it's just lame if we hack it because we're bored. So they wanted to, I don't know, make a statement, and sometimes they could have more thought behind it, and sometimes it's really not.
Yeah, absolutely. And today, if there's political motivations, typically these groups are then funded by governments themselves. But yeah, as you said, I think like bug bounties have made it tiny bit different for like individuals when it comes to security, because now they have a platform for reporting these things, as long as they basically stay in scope and work accordingly to the agreed rules and policies in there.
Yeah, exactly. People often hack for the challenge and the thrill of it.
Yeah.
And now when they have a legal alternative to it, they can brag about it on their high score lists and all that, rather than having to, I don't know, deface a website and write your name on it.
Yeah. They can publicly tweet about it.
Yeah, exactly. So, so now they have a very good alternative, like a more ethical alternative, which, in my opinion, is very good.
Yeah, but the like hacktivism is not completely dead. So, like for example, just recently, a hacker going by the name of Finnish Fisher announced a bug bounty program for hackers, basically.
Yeah, exactly. I saw that was also delivered as one of those, pure text files that are very popular. I read it, and I think, I mean, it brought a lot of nostalgia, to be honest. But yeah, that was a very strong political statement, and something you often saw. I think, before us. Like, I'm born 90s, so I think it was more common in the 80s, that kind of style. But the messages in that is a lot like fuck capitalism.
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah, and what they stated, for example, this is a quote from that manifesto, that they said that hacking to obtain and leak documents with public interest is one of the best ways for hackers to benefit the society, which is an interesting message, I think, today. Like, naturally, I think it's not that outdated, but when it comes to, for example, responsible disclosure or bug bounties, these kind of ideas don't typically come out in bug bounties, like, or never, because in bug bounties they ask you not to leak information or responsibly disclose the vulnerabilities that you find.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, we might call it responsible disclosure, but I guess the hacker in this case would not call that responsible, maybe. This hacker claims to be a she, so I'm going to refer to that. She says rather that how we best can, I can't remember the exact quote, but best benefit the society by leaking documents, etc. And I guess she would consider that responsible. Yeah. So I guess it's very subjective what's responsible
Absolutely.
In that case.
Yeah, and they are also offering up to $100,000 for hackers who are able to leak some kind of documents. I don't know where this money comes from, but they are paid in basically Bitcoin or other kind of cryptocurrency.
Yeah, I mean, in that same release, she talked about hacking a bank, so maybe from there.
Yeah, has some stored somewhere. Yeah, but as you said, maybe it's also like a subjective view on like what is responsible disclosure and what is not then. And I think that like hacktivism is like, it stands to hacktivism that you're asking for these kind of leaks basically. But if we go to just, because we are both in this profession and in this field working as professional security people, and I think we already basically touched upon this, but working in this field today is quite different. Like when I was studying, for example, it never occurred to me that I could be a pen tester. And then only when I entered the IT field and I worked as a sysadmin for a bit, and I was able then to, like inside a company, change to a pen tester role. Only then I understood that, okay, this is actually a career and you can make a career out of this. But I think you had this revelation much earlier than I did, because you were already back in 2008 doing this kind of line of work.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, I since I mentioned, like my dad's a farmer, he worked with his hands, and his dad was also a farmer on the same farm even, and same like on my mom's side, there were plumbers and, you know, so for me, the whole IT in general was never, I never saw it as a possibility to work with it. It was like, that was something you did as a hobby, like playing chess or something. So I remember when that kind of clicked for me. It was when I saw that there was a school that I actually ended up going to, an IT school here in Stockholm. And I'm like, holy shit, you can actually work with this? Like, is that a profession? Like, I had never like accepted that. But then of course it goes further with like the security and all that. It was, of course it existed, but it wasn't as big. Like nowadays you hear about it all the time in the media, and especially with like the elections in the US and the Snowden leaks and all that. It's become the norm. Like everyone knows that IT is everything basically.
Yeah.
But already 2007 or 2008, it wasn't that big. You didn't hear much about it. And I'm not sure if I really realized that security specifically could be a profession for me either. I honestly wasn't even sure if I wanted to work with IT. It was more like, I think it's fun, and I find it fairly easy. But do I want to have this as a profession or as a hobby? Now it ended up the hobby becoming the profession, which is, of course, I like that. But I remember having those kind of ideas as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. And here you are today.
Yeah, can't escape it. No,
Yeah.
I love it. It's fun.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely interesting. And I think also the shift, like when it comes to security, one of the reasons behind it must be that a lot of our lives are actually happening online. We have social media, we have our banks, our like health, and like everything is online. So it has also become more profitable to hack into these things for personal gain. So if you are a malicious actor and you're able to hack into a company and or steal data from them, that can be directly profitable for you if you sell that data in illegal marketplaces.
Yeah, exactly. I'd say like further back, people mostly had like maybe websites to show where they had their store, maybe. And now you have the store online, and you have all the user records, like of who buys from you, and maybe even like their history and stuff like that. And of course, that can be valuable for some people. If nothing else, it could be useful for doing other attacks, like spear phishing attacks, like kind of scamming people by stalking them and having good info. You can make this kind of scams much more successful, I guess.
Yeah.
Or you could, like, if people are password reusers and stuff like that. So since, as you mentioned, everything has moved online, so, or more or less everything, it gets more, you have a higher incentive to actually hack things. You don't have to go to their house to break in to look at them or whatever. You can do it like overseas, or I mean,
sitting at home and
yeah,
don't have to go outside.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a very easy way to be a criminal as well, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. But thinking about the web security, like because we also need to put more resources into it today than we had to maybe back in 2000. Do you feel that the security overall, like the security landscape, is getting better?
Yeah, I would definitely say that actually. Like, we're getting better at both defense and offense, but I would also say the to get into a fairly good security level, it's harder now than it was 10 years ago, because we have evolved. You have to understand more things, and we have kind of worked our way to patch a lot of the common problems. Like, you have a lot of frameworks that aren't by default SQL injection vulnerable, or you have also frameworks that are very good at mitigating excesses, for example. So it gets trickier, because when you use frameworks, you can have like one patch can fix a lot of things. And I think we have been fairly good at that, raising the security awareness. And but of course, there are still a lot of good hackers, and you can still make mistakes. But I would say it's better now.
Yeah. And as you said, the frameworks, they already have these built-in mechanisms to mitigate these, like they filter the input or the output that comes to or from the web application, so that using those web applications is more safe for end users today.
Yeah, exactly. We have learned by our mistakes, and it's a very good way of switching it, so you're maybe safe by default, and you have to, if you have some edge case where you don't want that kind of security mechanism for some reason, it's an opt-out rather than opt-in.
Yeah.
And I think that's really the change we have seen, and that we will hopefully continue to see. So
yeah, and I think today there's a lot more tools that can provide automated security also, and also like consultants and a lot of different kind of pen testers with different kind of knowledge and focus areas. So it's easier to also buy security these days.
Yeah, exactly. And if you feel you have the resources to actually fix things, you can also start like a responsible disclosure program. So you don't even have to pay people, but people might look at your things anyway, or if they accidentally find something, they know how to contact you and how to make it in a good way.
Yeah.
But I've seen also, like, of course, people hack for bug bounties to get a lot of money, but also responsible disclosures can be fairly useful because people can show it off on their maybe resume, or they can show it off on their online profiles, so they get invited to closed bug bounty programs, because there are a lot of those as well.
Yeah.
Not everyone wants to be public with their bug bounty program.
Yeah.
So people can also use it as a way to help their career.
Yeah.
And it's a win-win. Like,
yeah.
You get help with your security, and they get like credits for it, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there must be some people who just want to do this out of goodwill as well.
Yeah, definitely. I know there are people that are doing like security for charity. I can't remember exactly what it's called, like that group, but maybe Hackers for Charity or something.
Yeah.
Where they actually just purely do it out of goodwill.
Yeah.
And I would expect some people maybe want to exercise their skills or things like that as well, just to get a technical challenge. But
yeah, that's cool. So we've talked a lot about the past and the current state of the security and like the new trends that have been like emerging, but where do you see us going from here?
Partly, as I mentioned, all these frameworks or CMSs or even programming languages, I think they will become even better at making people do good decisions when it comes to security. So security by default, or maybe even as what's called Theodorat, or the creator of OpenBSD, that says optional security isn't security. So maybe even that hard, like you don't have a choice. But I think we'll become better at that. But of course, automation, I think, is a thing, definitely. Quite obvious in this case when it comes to Detectify, since that's what we do.
Yeah.
But I really believe in that. As I mentioned, it's harder and harder to get into the field of security, and there's fewer and fewer that are doing this like original research, maybe, or the top hackers. So we need to distribute that knowledge.
Yeah.
Not everyone can learn to hack that well. And those kind of insights shouldn't be only for those few that can, or the few that can afford to hire these people. Or if you look at the Google's bug bounty program, or Facebook, or some other, they have a enormous budget.
Yeah.
Obviously, that won't go for everyone.
Yeah.
But we want security for everyone anyway.
Yeah.
And it's not just the organizations themselves that would suffer from this. It's all the users of all these smaller websites and organizations. So what we need to do is find ways to distribute that knowledge, to spread that knowledge, so we can get a more secure internet experience, basically. And that's partly what we do. We try to take this knowledge from the few and automate it so it can reach much more people.
Yeah.
But knowledge would also go into those open source tools, or CMSs, or similar. So I think that's a futuristic way to look at security. At least that's what I believe and kind of hope for as well. So we don't get this like too centralized few services that you can actually feel that you trust, because those are the only one that can afford this kind of thing. So it's not just super big enterprises and nation states. It's actually more for everyone.
Yeah. Absolutely, and I think you made an excellent point there, that even though like companies need to be the ones enforcing security, but lack of security will always affect the end users, basically, in one way or another. Either their data is compromised or their devices are compromised, but like the target for malicious actors is either like a group of people, opportunistically everyone, or then a target, like a really specific target, like one person, or yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's that's a lot of the point. Like it's if your company gets hacked, of course you as a company will suffer. It will damage your brand and might have a lot of financial cost and things. But it also affects everyone that's using your service, or if they have their personal data on that service, or maybe other things that are even more sensitive than, I'm not sure, like Bitcoin wallets, for example, that could have a huge cost for people.
Yeah.
But also those more subtle, like, oh, your email has leaked, so now you got a lot of spam, or that's just annoying. But of course, it could lead to a lot of different things depending on how you use it and what kind of company it is.
Yeah.
But yeah, the point is that it's not just the organizations that suffer, it's all the users of it, and we need to help everyone be more safe or secure.
Absolutely. And to summarize, I think that even though like we're getting better at security, for example, through automation and from raising awareness and through these kind of things, also the threats in the future will keep on increasing, because even more and more data will be online, and we and our devices will be even more connected in the future.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we see organized crime using internet as a platform as well, like ransomware for hospital, which is just terrible.
Yeah.
And I don't think we'll see less of that. We'll probably see more incentive for people, because it's like you can sit in whichever country and hack which other country that you want. So you're fairly safe from being caught.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for coming here and having this very enlightful chat with me, Johan. And
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you. So that's it for our episode. If you have any questions or any ideas, feel free to reach out to us over Detectify Twitter or undetected@detectify.com. See you next time.